Welcome everyone to our annual Women in Conversation program to celebrate International Women's Day. The theme of this year's International Women's Day and the panel discussion is Embrace Equity. I'm Rupanjana Datta, the Managing Editor of Asian Voice, the English news weekly published by ABPL. This year is a very important one in ABPL's history, as Gujarat Samachar, one of our flagship publications, celebrates 50 years. As we talk about embracing equity and breaking the glass ceiling with our panelists, I must pay tribute to our publisher and editor-in-chief, C.B. Patel, who has been a visionary and a passionate supporter of women's role in society. In fact, during our last Women in Conversation event in 2022, he said, "The onus is on men to ensure that women have more than equal rights. In the words of James Brown, it's a man's world, but it would be nothing, absolutely nothing, without a woman." In our company's history, the founder and first editor of Gujarat Samachar was a woman. She was called Kusum Shah. In the last 50 years, most managing editors and associate editors of Asian Voice and Gujarat Samachar have been women. In fact, in the last 50 years, out of some 14 editors in various roles, 9 have been women. Even today, the managing editor of Gujarat Samachar, Kokila Patel, I hope she's here somewhere, right at the end, is a woman. Consulting editor of Gujarat Samachar is a woman. And out of Asian Voice's 8 journalists, including the news editor Shefali Saxena and myself, 6 are women. ABPL is perhaps the only Asian company, mind you, in the UK today where both its publications or news weeklies are run by women managing editors. CB has always actively believed and promoted women power, which he calls Nari Shakti, and has encouraged us to push boundaries. CB's wife, Pushpa, who I call Pushpa Auntie, and sister-in-law Saroj Ben were actively involved in the growth of this business for 49 years, and so has been his daughter Uja until recently. So I would request all of you to give a big round of applause for CB, who has Conversation in 2022, Group Captain John Swenston of the Royal Air Force said, "All roles in the Royal Air Force are open to women. It is a place where women can achieve their full potential and have meaningful and fulfilling careers. We are seeing an increasing number of women in senior leadership roles. We believe that mentoring and supporting one another is exceedingly important." And events such as the Women in Conversation, where we share our experience, wisdom, and ways to support one another, are very important. We're delighted to have Air Commodore Joe Lincoln MBE and members of the RAF in our midst this evening. This event would not have been possible without the support of the RAF for the second consecutive year. Can I please ask you? Before I request Air Commodore Joe Lincoln to say a few words and then introduce our moderator and panelists for this evening, I would like you to note that we have copies of Asian Voice with our Women's Day special available at the back. Please grab a copy before you go. When and if you share about today's event on your social media, which I would definitely encourage you to do, please tag us using the handles mentioned in the TV screen. Also, today is a historical day for women in films. After 40 years, not one, but 2 Indian women have won an Oscar. For the first time, India has won an Oscar for a film that was entirely shot in India. Last time a woman of Indian origin won an Oscar was back in 1983. Bhanu Athaya, a costume designer, won for Gandhi, which was a Hollywood production. Enough said. Now could I please request Air Commodore Joe Lincoln MB to say a few words, please.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. Firstly, may I say sir, and I will call you sir, C.V. Patel. You are an inspiration. I arrived here this evening and I've never met someone who makes you feel so welcome in a crowded room. So sir, on behalf of the Royal Air Force, it's our privilege to be here this evening, so thank you. Wow, there's not a lot I can say when I know I'm going to be followed by an incredible panel. But I think for me, and as we alluded to, Group Captain Joanne Swainston was here last year, and I think for me it's really important that not every role was open when I joined the Royal Air Force back in 1997, yes, that long ago. One of the young women I was joined with tonight said to me, "Mom, how long have you been in the Royal Air Force?" Because trying to work out my rank and how many years it took me to be there. So it took me 25 years, and I'm celebrating every moment. But I think for me, it's not my age group that it's important. So tonight I had the privilege of meeting Tanushka and Anya, 21 and 17. And it's their dreams that are important, because if you'd said to me when I was 17 or 21 that I would be amongst such an auspicious group this evening as a woman in defence, still serving as a regular officer, and that I would be Air Commodore and being privileged enough to stand up front in front of all of you to say thank you, I wouldn't have believed you, because the young 17, 21-year-old didn't believe anything was possible. All I can say to the young ladies in here tonight, anything is possible, dream big, and just go for it. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't, because you genuinely can. So team, that I'm honoured to be here, both men and women from the Royal Air Force, thank you for your support, because all of us as officers in the Royal Air Force, we can't do it without a brilliant team behind us. And I always, wherever I go, have had a brilliant team. So thank you. Tonight, the panel, I'll let you guess. There is one of the panel members who I had the privilege to meet last week at the GG2 Awards. She was actually, it was a list, Asian Power list of men and women, and she ranked 24 in that list. That was my privilege to sit next to her at dinner, and I asked for her autograph, so I can't wait to hear what she's got to say this evening, so no pressure. Take care.
Thank you so much, Jo. Could I now request the moderator and panelists to come up on the stage, please? Our moderator is Mamta Shaha. You have their details on the screen, but still, I would quickly read out a little bit on them. Our moderator is Mamta Shaha, who is a business psychologist, trainer, transformational coach, and TEDx speaker. Our panelists include Neena Patel, Digital Transformation and Innovation Executive at well-known groups such as the Net-a-Porter Group, Harvey Nichols, and Farfetch. We have Asma Khan, who's a celebrity chef, restaurateur for Darjeeling Express, and award-winning cookbook author. We have Dr. Swati Tingra, External Monetary Policy Committee member in the Bank of England and Associate Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics. And then we have Sanam Arora, who's Chair of National Indian Students and Alumni Union UK and Commissioner for UK's International Higher Education Commission. The panel discussion will be followed by a short question and answer session. Could I request the audience to ask questions relevant to this evening's discussion, please, and strictly keep the questions brief and to the point. Shall I hand over to the moderator now? Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that lovely intro, and thank you to everyone who's coming on tonight, especially to our panelists. So we're going to start nice and broad, and we'd really love to know, what does equity mean to you? So let's start with you, Asma. What does equity mean to you?
I think it can mean different things at different points in your life. I think the most important thing is it's about how it makes you feel. If you feel respected and if you feel honored and you do not feel sidelined and made to feel small for whatever reason, that is when you know that there is equity. Because if you feel equal to anyone, because it's not just about us and them, it can be people who look just like you, the same gender, the same age. It can be all of that. So it really is about, I think, honoring each other. And for me, that is equity.
Thank you so much, Asma. Neena, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, looking at the workplace as the lens to answer this question, I think equity is where everyone feels like opportunity and progression is possible based on merit versus based on the many other factors that influence it. Now, I think a woman that I admire greatly, Sharmdeen Reid, she's an entrepreneur here in London, she said that like equality is going to look like when we have, especially with gender equality, when we have just as many mediocre women in leadership positions as we have mediocre men. And it's quite a controversial way to put it, but it's true. Opportunity needs to exist equally for all.
Thank you so much. So far what I'm hearing is that feeling, it's how we feel, it's about how we're treated externally, so that requires a community as well, working together, and it's about seeing equality across the board, even in mediocrity. Thank you so much, Sanam.
Well, I think I agree with what you just said. There are more Peters in the boards of FTSE 500 companies than there are women, and that's quite something, right? So yes, when mediocrity, not that they're mediocre, permeates through leadership positions across the board, we'll know. But aside from that, I think of it in two ways. One is an outcomes-driven world, and the outcomes-driven world is where we're not having this conversation. That's what equity would feel like. And frankly, it's about, do I have the platform to just be myself, to be authentic? Because when I'm authentic is when my best self will come out. And so equity is equal to being able to not having this conversation and having a platform where I'm not thinking about this particular divisiveness between genders or between other factors of intersection.
And showing up as yourself. So we've got something to aspire towards, to not have this conversation. Thank you so much, Sanam. And what about you, Swati?
I think I've got it. So actually, let me just say again what Nina said. I was at an event last time with Jo, which is the one she mentioned recently. And one of the key, in much more colourful language, what one of the MPs, Don Butler, had to say was precisely that remark, that why is it that in the House of Commons there's so many more, I won't use precisely the language she used, but mediocre MPs who are male as opposed to female mediocre MPs. I think that's actually quite a fair assessment of the situation. The other thing I would add to that, which also came out at the event, and I remember all of us who were sitting there nodding our heads sort of subtly and understanding that that had happened to each one of us, it was such a real feeling, was when Don Butler said that it's incredible how often you're in a room, you've said something, it's gone unnoticed, and 10 minutes later a man says the same thing and it's considered brilliant. And I can see again lots of nods here. Yes, we've all had that happen to us, and unfortunately that is the world we live in, and unless we push back, nobody else will for us.
So it's about finding your voice, calling those things out, and it's about really your authentic self, creating a feeling. Brilliant, thank you, ladies. The next question that I'd like to ask you is, in a world that we're currently in, hopefully we're moving away from, there is gender bias, and that's the reality, and that's why we don't have that equality as yet. We are more aware of it, we have aspirations around it, we are astute to where it isn't happening. But with the status being as it is, how do you feel, and let's start with you, Swati, this time, how do you feel we can fully leverage from our potential in order to crack that ceiling of gender bias?
I can tell you of my personal experience.
That would be amazing.
It may not resonate
Yes.
with other people,
Yeah.
but mine is naturally an area where this is really about the force of the arguments that you make, whether that's in academia, whether that's in the policy realm. And that's one thing that I've always tried to do, which is just have the courage to say what you think. And luckily people around me have turned around and reinforced that view that yes, please do that, but that's simply not enough. Because there will be many times when you might actually be tempted to raise your voice because it's not going to be heard despite the force of those arguments. And I don't have a better solution for it. I think typically what many of us end up doing as a result of that is to start behaving like men ourselves and saying that, oh, I'm going to shout even louder and I want to be heard and I'm going to behave like a man and I'm going to make sure that I'm aggressive enough and put my argument out there. I feel like that's actually really counterproductive, and I really hope that amongst particularly the young women who are here, don't fall into that trap, because that's actually creating the same world that we don't want created, and we want to have, you know, female traits be reflected in the workplace much more than they are currently.
So within your career, Swati, just staying on that point around, sometimes you have to speak louder, sometimes you have to call things out, not at the detriment of you being who you are, your authenticity. What do you do then? What have you done to be so brilliant? What did you do to get heard without compromising who you are and what you stand for?
Patience.
Patience, yes.
When things come together, the force of the argument really stands its weight. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen the first time, that's not going to happen the second time. You might get really upset about it and give up. Of course, I've given up several times in my life, and there are many things that I wish I'd done differently. But at least now I'm old enough that I can afford to, sort of distance myself from some of the initial failures. And I feel like for young women, that's really, really important. Particularly, I'm in a completely male-dominated field. I can't sort of emphasize how daunting it is to be able to speak up when you're younger in front of a whole bunch of well-dressed, well-suited men. But that's really what you're going to have to do.
And this is the last point, so I will leave you alone, but what is the narrative that you tell yourself? What do you say in your mind to help you eradicate those barriers, those perceived barriers that might be at play?
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I am, because all my life I tried to say I wasn't going to be like my mother, but unfortunately that does come back, and the whole thing that always sits in my mind is that your mother did not educate you, did not spend all those hours teaching you maths just for you to shut up and not talk. So due credit to her. Luckily, we all have all these powerful female characters in our life, and I really hope we take inspiration from them as opposed to the people who look daunting to us.
Okay, so the answer is, think about what your mum told you growing up. Thank you so much, because that narrative plays a massive part, doesn't it? Nina, I'm going to move to you. So you've had many different colourful options in your career, and you continue to do so. I'll let you share that with the audience. How do you continue to leverage from your potential and break any potential bias there may be? It might not necessarily be gender bias, it might be some other bias at play. What do you do?
Yeah, I think that for me it started, and I wish I could pinpoint like what the thing was instilled that made me feel like I could, break through. But I studied computer science back in the States at a time where, I think it still is, but at a time it's a very male-dominated environment, and used to being one of 2 or 3 girls in the computer cluster working on assignments. And this is where it goes to embracing the fact that you are a woman and bring different skills. I was surrounded by a bunch of guys that were just so logical, so analytical. When you're building computer programs, that's needed, but sometimes there's a little bit of finesse that's needed within them too. And I found very quickly that there was a different part of the equation that I could solve for. Even if it came to, how it was going to look like in the end, what the problem was that we were actually going to solve, or how we were going to present the solution. If I wasn't going to be as deeply in the weeds technically, and not to say that women can't be, this was just me, I found the thing that I brought that was a bit different to the equation. And I think that when we talk about the need for having women in all of these environments, is that we do bring something different. Now in a leadership role, there's an empathy that I think women naturally have more so than men do, in a way of being collaborative, that is so necessary, especially with the next generation of employee coming up. But for me, I think I must have just realized that quite young, that there's something different that I'm bringing. And so then when I graduated, I went into IT consulting. I was working in a lot of telecom companies. So again, I'm a young brown girl walking into a room that was generally middle-aged white American men. And so first, that they're looking at you, you're one of the only women in the room. Second, you're young, and we have the benefit of melanin, so we look a lot younger for a lot longer. I think even today, some people look at me and they're like, what are you talking about? You're like in your late 20s, early 30s, and I'm like, I wish, but, and so you sense it. They think that you're, and I think that then comes to knowing, being confident in what you know, and this comes, as you get older and as you get wiser and get more self-assured. But we all were, like I think most people in this room, we all had the benefit of education and parents who instilled that in us. And so go back to that, like sit firm on that foundation and have that confidence to be present in that room and make your voice heard. And as quickly as you can, do some personal development. Look inside, learn about yourself. I didn't until I was in my mid to late 30s. And again, I didn't grow up in a household that asked those kind of questions, that asked, how are you feeling? Or how did this experience make you feel? Or, these were not conversations, right? It was like, go study, go do your math, science, whatever, go to university, get a job, find financial security. Start asking yourself those questions. Start digging into who you are, what drives you as early as possible, because aside from all of the education and all of the hard skills, it's only those softer skills and that true understanding of who I am that now gives me the self-confidence to feel empowered in whatever choice I make next. And I think that is something I assume it's our entire culture. It was definitely within my family. We didn't talk about those things. We didn't ask ourselves those questions. I didn't know who I was until, in the last 5-6 years where I've had the time and the external influence to encourage me to go do that.
Thank you so much, Nina. So EQ is the driving force behind IQ, and remember your roots, what your mum told you. Fantastic, thank you so much. Asma, I'm going to come to you now. I saw a couple of your videos over the last week, and one thing that really stood out to me was your graciousness and your ease and your calm. You're not there saying, look at my great restaurant in Kingly Place. You just were so humble and such a collaborative leader where you're taking all your team with you. And at the same time, you're astute, you're well recognized, as you should be. How did you do it?
I think I've watched for too long men and women in positions of power taking all the credit. And especially in the business in which I am, in a restaurant, so many chefs present themselves. And unfortunately the media also feeds that, of this tormented genius, the Van Gogh of cooking. When I can tell you one thing, there are so many people involved behind the walls who are cooking, and starting off with the person who washed the plate, the kitchen porter. Your food wouldn't look so great if your plate had a smudge of dirt on it. And it's purely for that reason I get paid the same rate as the kitchen porter who washes the plates. Because otherwise I'd have to walk into that kitchen and tell him or her that I'm worth more than him or her if they're working harder. And it's that realization that you know that you are only as powerful as your team. Without your team, you're nothing. And if you do not actually share that credit, you're not going to win. And I just want to add this other thing. I'm 53. And in our culture, if the moment you hit in your 40s, you're considered to be less creative. No one's going to lend you money. And I just want to assure everybody, the bias against women is as bad in the East as it is in the West. In the East, they're less sophisticated. No, not you. Not you, don't do. My girl can't do this. All of that. When I tried to raise money, when I was looking for a property, white men in suits asked me, where's your business partner? They asked me where my suitable boy was. There's a veneer of sophistication in the West. The bias is still the same. I'm a sole female founder. The money on the table was mine. They wanted to know whether there was a man guaranteeing that money. And my bank asked me, why don't you borrow the money from your husband? This is frightening because you realize that, I will now only get stronger. Alone, I am very weak. I will get stronger when I build a collaboration around me. It didn't have to be highly educated, women or women who were great leaders. It had to be people who believed in the collective. That's when the collective is formidable. So all this kind of strength that I know a lot of people say you radiate, that there is passion, this comes from a knowledge that I know I built the best team and I'm one of the team player. That's what it is.
Deserves a round of applause. I think everyone does right now. Are we enjoying the discussion so far, everyone? Yeah, hopefully you're writing notes, loads of golden nuggets there. So what I heard was collaboration, intention, purpose, working as a team, using your strengths, learning about who you are, authenticity, as Salam says. It's all about really not forgetting that and knowing that you can do it if you want to. Okay, so my next question is for Salam. So how do you strike a balance between your corporate job and volunteering? Because you do a lot of volunteering. And I ask this because actually just off the back of what we've discussed, in terms of Nina, we have so much that we want to do, so much that we can offer, that doesn't necessarily sit in the realms of the job that we sign up to. How do you do it? How does she do it?
Well, I think I come from a certain privilege, and that privilege is parents who have never discriminated, never made us feel any different between my younger brother and myself. And I think it is that privilege that you take and you say, Dad, Mom, I want to do this, and they advise you and they guide you, and they are your biggest mentors, and that support system. And I think it's about something Asma said, which is teamwork and collaboration, because the only reason, so I'm a bit like Swati on the corporate finance side of things in my day job, we don't have a life in banks and investment management houses. We can have some pretty tough days and nights and mornings and early mornings and lots of those. But on top of that, to then have a voluntary organization that we run, it's only happening because we are blessed to have a team of volunteers who all rally around when something needs doing. So for example, when the COVID crisis hit, and there was significant food poverty in the country, I think we were probably one of the first, certainly South Asian organizations, to put a 30+ member team together to work day and night to support people who needed food, people who needed help with accommodation, people who needed help with going back to India because there were very restricted flights back, so we worked closely with the Indian government. And I think I think there is a sense of purpose that comes from being able to, and it's a very selfish thing, it's a purely selfish thing. There's a sense of purpose and empowerment that comes from being able to do whatever little you can for your community, which you then find, I find it empowers me at work a lot. And there is a lot of learning from work that you take into, or those skills that you develop at work that you take into conversations in the not-for-profit environment where you are lobbying and your policy, or you're fighting for students' rights and what's not. So I think there is the background of privilege, and not privilege of financial security necessarily, but privilege of parents who do not discriminate between a girl and a boy. And it's then the feeling, certainly, it's a personal thing, like I said, it's a very selfish thing that you find that you're so empowered by doing things, and it's about finding that purpose, I think, and taking that back into work. But I also think one thing that one needs to be able to do, it's picking up from what everyone here has said, is that there have been so many times I've walked into a room of middle-aged white men, very well suited, and I found myself at the intersection of, I'm probably the only female, probably the only young person, probably the only one that doesn't speak in a British accent, and quite deliberately so. I don't find the need to be able to fake an accent to fit in. And that is something with due credit to British society, for instance, as well. But I find that in order to put yourself out there and put your authentic self out there, there is a sense of cunningness, or might not be a great word, which is you need to be able to ask yourself those questions of identity and who am I and what am I doing, but it's also then being able to articulate it in a way that the person in front of you understands. And so really developing a personal brand, which is something I would definitely urge people to do, and especially young people to do, is to really understand your audience and put things in a way that work for them. So in a gender equality committee at work, not everyone might be there because they want to, that they're all about, I'm not saying this about my workplace, fantastic workplace, zero gender pay gap, but there are places where you need to be able to put arguments rather than necessarily saying, oh, it's all about women's rights, because sometimes that can put people off, unfortunately. You might take the argument of neurodiversity. So I think it's about understanding your audience and tailoring your message and your own personal brand being articulated in a way that puts your best self forward, but is very conscious of who you're speaking to and how and what that outcome is that ultimately you want to get to. But I think you need to find your purpose, and that brings me back to, mine is possibly giving back to society. I love doing that. I love helping other people become better versions of themselves too, because it's, again, very selfish. I find that makes me a better person. But I think it's also about what can you take from where, and finding the right mentor.
Yeah, I think that's really refreshing, Stella, because often we're raised to have this linear pathway of do this, do this, do this, do this, and don't veer off. But actually what you're saying is you can dip into a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this, but know what you stand for. So know your branding, know your purpose, and appreciate all that you're gaining that can contribute to everything that you're doing. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Swati now. So my question for you, Swati, is what do women need? I'll make it easier. What do women need to know about the economy?
Large question. So let me actually start with saying, what is the first measure that you typically think of when you think of the economy? And the one you're probably going to, at the moment, say is inflation. We'll talk about that as well if you want. But GDP would be the first statistic that everybody sort of understands and knows about. Unfortunately, when I was young, there was a book by Marilyn Waring, who's a New Zealand MP for some time and one of the greatest feminist economists of all times. And it is incredible how well it's argued and what she says, which is that measure of GDP, if you're looking after your own child, you're basically a zero in that measure. If you had instead outsourced that task to somebody, that might help and you might show up as a positive. But that's what these statistics do. They undervalue and they almost sort of devalue the work that women do. It's not therefore surprising that despite all the progress we've made, despite the fact that STEM subjects now pretty much have a pretty good gender mix when you look at the starting point, in economics, we're way, way behind that. We're still at 30%. And the key reason, I think, in my view, is that all the stuff that matters to women, which is the fact that when there are economic vagaries, we're probably suffering more than the average man. The fact that women's work is completely undercounted in GDP statistics, which then become the basis for how welfare allocations are made, where spending is done. Those things become incredibly important in being able to make sure that the stuff that goes on in big policy making tends, if we wanted to reflect women's interests, we've got to get active and make sure that that work gets counted, make sure that in fact we are sort of perpetually fighting to ensure that those policies, big policies that are being made, have very different effects on men versus women, and therefore it's really important that women are there to shape the economy. And which is why it's really important that every one of you out here, particularly the young women, economic empowerment, if you don't have that, you're basically never going to be able to really seriously challenge gender norms, for the reason that you're never going to feel that comfortable or feel that sense of security to be able to push back. So I think first, get yourself economically empowered, and second, make sure that the work of women is counted.
Thank you so much. And what's the first point of call for women who are, may find this intimidating? What would you say? What's the first point of call? Where can they go for help? Where can they seek that clarity?
I think do your own research first. That's always going to be fundamentally what you're going to have to rely on. Beyond that, I think, there is a reason we look up to people like Joe and to Asma. It's because they've created they've broken down those barriers, which then we can leverage.
Yes.
And I think that's really, you've got to find the right, there is always going to be a community around, and that's what you've got to look for. And I want to point out one more thing, I think, which is really fundamental. If you look at the content of what men talk about in panels like these versus women, you will see this common thread of like, oh, we want to give back to society. That's what we want to do. And I think that's not necessarily, completely divorced from the fact that yes, that is what a lot of women do want to do. And therefore there are people out there who are prioritizing things that are of public importance or of societal importance, and you've got to find like-minded people. They're enough, otherwise there's enough disappointment in the world.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that's a really important point. Leverage from your community. If you haven't got one, find your community. But definitely have those conversations, don't shy away from them. So my next question is for you, Nina. It's around, what's your perspective on us as an Asian society? Have we evolved enough to let our women experiment with career options?
Yeah, so yes and no. I think that from my experience, it's been really interesting, the journey that like my family and my extended family have been on. So my parents are not super traditional in the sense that we think of it. They were the only, of my dad and his three brothers, my dad was the only one to have a love marriage. He met my mum here in the UK. They came from East Africa. All of my dad's brothers are settled in East London, open newsagents, bought properties, you know the drill. My dad decided that he was going to be a computer programmer, moved us to Milton Keynes, applied for green cards, moved us to the US, and basically started over there. So they've always been a bit different, right? And but even then, especially coming from my mum, more so, as I was going through university and as I was graduating, there's this like underlying thread of, do a career that is going to secure you financial stability, find a partner, because that's going to be a key element in that equation, particularly when you want to have children and things like that. And now I can look back at it and understand that the underlying driver there it was consistent, right? Financial stability, like not feeling lonely, feeling secure. All of the things that I realize now my parents' generation didn't feel, right? I mean, it's a generation that, in my dad's case, like kicked out of the country that you were born in, moved to a new country and really and start from scratch. And then my parents went and moved to another country and started from scratch. Like this sense of security was always removed at some point. And so for me, it was just like, that's what she was always trying to find for me. And the only narrative that they knew was a steady career and find a partner. I think the first time that I really threw a big wrench in their plans was I was in my late 20s and I decided that I was going to leave my steady IT consulting job in the States. I really wanted to work in the luxury fashion industry. So I managed to find a job over here working for Net-a-Porter. And so I left everything. I rented out my house, I left the US, I took a new job with like a 50% pay cut because it was in the industry that I wanted to be in, and came over here. And I don't think we've ever had the conversation. They thought I was crazy, but they also didn't have any control over what I was going to do. Like their influence on me wasn't to the point where they were going to be able to stop me. And as I've come here and I've rebound myself and I'm on a path and I feel, and they can see that I'm happy and my career choices keep wiggling around, but they're giving me that sense of stability and security, and I have friends and family around me who are making me feel, the narrative has changed like completely. And it's, do what you want, you're not working right now, oh, you'll be fine, you'll find something else. Oh, you don't have a partner or you don't want a partner, that's fine. Because now they can see that this choice has led to me having the things that they were always looking for us, which is this sense of stability and security. And so I think I've gone off the rails a little bit, but it's only in hindsight that I can see that the underlying desire that they had that pushed us down one path, or at least me, I've achieved it in a different way. And now they can see that, and now it's okay. And I think that that's what we now can instill in the next generation, whether it's our daughters or even just the women that are 10 years younger than us, like showing them that there are multiple paths to achieving those underlying, hierarchy of needs, that underlying needs that you have to live a fulfilled and happy and sustained life, which my parents' generation, they hadn't been exposed to it, so they didn't know that it's possible.
Thank you so much, Nina. You absolutely answered that question. You did beautifully. And what I heard was that, using the values that raised you, essentially, you've been able to break down the traditional mindset and expectations to carve your own path. So it's beautiful how, that history, that tradition has then dictated a newfound freedom. Right? I heard right, didn't I? Yes. Okay, good. So, Asma, my question for you is, what's next? What's your vision for 2023 and beyond?
My dream is to open a school for mentoring women. Not only for hospitality, but I hope mainly for a lot of women in hospitality. Because what happens when you ask a restaurant and they never ever openly talk about what is the gender split in their restaurant? You'll find people playing roles. The hostess will be a woman, but you will never find the sommelier as a woman. Head chef is never a woman. You'll find them in the pastry section. You'll find women making pastries. And I think that the only way we can change is when women become leaders. You will never find women in positions of power in a restaurant, in a hotel. Very, very rare. And it isn't just that, you just don't need a token. You don't need a box ticked. You need to have 3 or 4. You need to have that power, that there's a group of women who are looking out for each other. You need to know you're not alone. So I'm hoping to use my restaurant to have on Sunday school. But where I want women, and I hope, even women from the RAF, I think it's so inspirational to see women of different age, color, age group, and obviously, having risen in their ranks, coming and talking to women. Because I think all of us need to learn how to lead. Without feeling, we need to excuse and explain ourselves. I want to go into a room and own it, but I don't want to be able to have to justify why I am powerful, why I will stand up for the weak, why I will help the poor, why I will speak up for refugees. I don't need to justify that. And this is the whole thing, that the inner confidence comes from knowing that there are other women, and you look after them and say, wow, she made it. And because she is like me in lots of ways, and this is beyond the color of my skin and my age and my accented Indian voice, it is really about the path that that person took. Even doing a different profession, but they fell on the hurdles on which you have fallen too, and they won. And I always think that every hurdle on which I fell, and I'm scarred from all the battles that I've lost, but in the end, I am not running the same race as a white man, but I'm also not running the same race as a white woman. As a woman of color, as an immigrant, as a mother, all of these other things, they're cultural baggage that I carry, which slows me down, but I won. So I think this is really important that, I want to use my restaurant as a space, as an oasis. This is what I want to do, and for this, I know I don't even need money. I just need to open my door, have samosas and chai. That's it.
What time can we come? Thank you so much. So, are we okay for time? Yes? Okay, good. So, Swati, I'd like to ask you, what advice would you, in hindsight, give your younger self and our future generations, particularly with a lens on the economy and your secondment at the Bank of England and all the great work that you're doing? What advice?
I would have usually said the thing that I've already said, which is don't be a man. But beyond that,
Yeah.
I think the key point is, I didn't get any of the jobs I've got simply because I had such a great CV. I didn't. And that's the truth.
Yeah.
Why I got the jobs I got was because I did things which were fundamentally important for the public debate. And that's what matters. We want to change the world, we've got to do it ourselves. Nobody's, if you keep waiting for change to happen with time, it's going to be generations. And I don't have that kind of patience. I want things to change in my lifetime.
I think that's so empowering, and I think that can apply to everyone in any industry. You know, we've been raised, a lot of us, I make the assumption, but you know, girls are seen but not heard. And so finding your voice can be a difficult thing. I particularly know that with my clients, and that voice chakra, that throat chakra, unlocking it, it's scary. But I think you're right, finding that voice and finding your opinion in public debate. Write that down, everyone. Write it down for me. Okay, thank you so much. And what about you? What advice would you have given your younger self, and what advice would you like to give future generations who may be walking in the same path as you?
I think it's really about finding your tribe. It's about finding a support system that will support you no matter what your mad, wild dreams are or thoughts are. In fact, you know, I started, let me give an example. Indian students have been coming to this country to study for centuries, you know, from Mahatma Gandhi to Nehru, all names you would have heard. They've all been Indian students in the country. In fact, India's constitution was written by a gentleman who went to the same university we shared, the London School of Economics, Dr. Ambedkar, and yet someone said to me that no one started a national union for Indian students, despite them having come here for centuries. And I found that bizarre and interesting, and I found that as an opportunity. And I discussed that with someone who's a very dear friend, who 10 years ago we were sitting in her bed, she's still here today, Binaisha. And I said, well, this is crazy. Why don't we do something about it? Now, Binaisha's a British Asian, very connected to India, but it's not something she necessarily identifies with, you know, Indian students coming over as international students. But we said, well, we've got to do something about it, because some of you might remember 10 years ago was not a particularly good time to be an international student in this country. The anti-immigrant sentiment was kicking in, you know, eventually that led to Brexit. Yet we said, you know what, we're going to do something about it, because the suffering of hundreds of thousands of international students was too much. And so a bit like Swati said, find those public matters of public importance that you can really shape and influence. And I think it's about finding that tribe. And so my tribe was Binaisha, but I'm sure other people will find their tribe and find, but also that tribe has different stakeholders and different actors. There's your support system, which is your friends, I mentioned your parents if you're lucky enough, but it's also about the family you go on to build. And that family could be your mentors. I think it's about finding the right mentors and hunting the right mentors at work, outside. And so some of my greatest mentors have been other women, senior women who have, like us, paved that path before us, but also some very senior men. Mr. Virendra Sharma is a member of Parliament in the UK. I think he's won his constituency 5 times in a row. He is one of the biggest advocates of young women, and I go to him with almost every little trouble I have and ask for his advice. So I think it's really about being quite sharp and focused about who that mentor can be, because they can really transform your life. I think the only other thing I want to say is there's no need to fake something to fit in. You just have to put your authentic self out there. In those boardrooms when I've walked, and I've been the only young, white, not white person, brown person, not speaking in the same accent as I mentioned before, that's really daunting. That's really, really scary. And pardon my French, but you're shitting yourself inside. But actually you can turn that into an opportunity by being like, hey, I'm the only one in this position. That gives me an insane amount of empowerment and leverage over all of you here. So as long as I know my shit, as long as I know my knowledge, as long as I know what I'm here to talk to you about, and as long as I put aside those fears and ignore what's going on inside, which is and just say what I want to say in a way that I know will land, and that's the thing you have to prepare about, is who is that audience, then I think it'll get easier for you. And then there's something also finally about shouting through the roof about what needs to change. We're living in a world where countries like the United States, women are having to fight over their bodies and their rights to have children or not have children. I mean, in India, our Supreme Court is far more progressive, let me put it that way. And we're just sitting there going, what on earth is happening? So we're living in this very bizarre world where you feel like you're taking 2 steps forward but 10 steps back at the same time. I think it's, like Swati said, we need to shout, and we need to shout, and governments have a role to play, and we need to make governments work to further those goals, rather than what's happening in the US, for instance.
Thank you so much, thank you. Be in the public debate. Your tribe creates your vibe. leverage from that tribe to speak your truth. Don't be someone that you're not. And shout from the ceilings. Lovely. What about you, Nina? Advice for younger self, anything fresh to share?
Well, just from what Sanam just said, I think another one is your difference is your superpower. There's a founder, Deepa Khosla, who started a beauty brand called Indie Wild that I've invested in, and that's like their slogan, your difference is your superpower. And I think that's what you're saying. For my younger self, oh gosh, stop caring so much about what you think everybody else thinks you should be doing. I mean, I think growing up with all of this expectation, and you need to be the best at this, and you need to be top of your class, and you need to get into the best universities, and blah, blah, blah. And I cared so much about what I thought everybody else expected me to be doing. And it's a good and a bad thing. It gives you a drive, and perhaps when you're younger, you need that, right? Like you need like a path to something to keep pushing you. If you don't, some people just inherently know it from a very young age. Like this is my purpose, and this is what I didn't have that, so it helped me. But then it got to a point where it was just like hindering me, making a decision around what my next move is going to be, and I know that it's not really what I want to do, but it's what I think I'm supposed to be doing because of how educated I've now become and what my peers are doing and what other people that I went to university with are doing. The minute that I was able to let that go, and again, it wasn't until I started doing some work on myself, I'm so free. Like I'm now like living my life, making the moves that I know that I want to make because they're going to make me feel good. And it's not because I think I need to be CEO of this, that, or the other. It might happen, but now I feel confident it's going to be because it's a business that I really want to be part of, or because it's something that I've created. So yeah, I just wish I'd learned younger to not care so much about what other people think.
Thank you, Nina. So it's all about that intrinsic motivation as opposed to the extrinsic validation, affirmation, and well done, you're on the right path, you're ticking all the boxes, actually what it is that you want to do. And
Can I just say something just to add to what Nina said? I think that's so important. We are going crazy, our generation and the generations below, because of Instagram, because of algorithms that are telling us that all our friends are holidaying 24/7 in the most amazing destinations in the world, and here we are at work at 9 p.m. at night writing a report that we don't want to write. It's all fake, and I think it's what you're saying here is you don't need to fake it. You don't need to feel the need to fake it. And I think the generations, my friends, the generations below, my brother's 7 years younger than me. He is an entirely different generation. He's not on Instagram, thank God. But I find people are just going crazy. And it's this need to get validation from external sources by showing off a life they don't have. And I think that's driving us all down a very bad path. Without naming it, the tech billionaires of the world are continuing to get richer. That divide of concentration of wealth is continuing to get worse because of that. It's at the cost of our mental sanity. And I think if young people can attempt to not fall into that trap, then the world would be a much better place for all of their own sanities.
Yes, absolutely. Be mindful of what you're doing, why you're doing it, what's the motivation. So as we're going to end with you, what's the advice you'd give to your younger self and the future generations who are following in a similar path to you?
I think the most important thing is to be unafraid, because I feel this all the time. When I wanted to open a restaurant, there was nobody who looked like me on food media. You didn't see anyone. This is 10 years ago. You didn't have any female owner of a restaurant. You only saw white men on television cooking Indian food. You had Madhur Jaffrey and then you had nobody. And this whole idea that, is there a space for me on the stage? And I would have told my younger self then not to have doubted it. I was just lucky to have got where I did. And I'm fortunate, but I didn't plan it. I didn't even plan the all-female kitchen. I can fake it now and say, I always plan to have an all-female kitchen. I am the only female-founded, all-Indian female kitchen in the world at this level. It is 100% planned this. But the whole point is that when I was young, I didn't see this as, I want to get X, Y, and Z. I took it step by step. I think the problem is that there is this perception of success, a lot of it driven by social media, that you just started cooking and you want to be, on MasterChef. You want to win, and I think this is so harmful. I used to make, after working the whole day, make 2 pounds. I would walk in the snow to deliver my food. I struggled a lot. And all of y'all have only known me when I've become successful. This is just the beginning of my success. All my struggle days you never saw. Problem with young people, and I think that, I was also in that trap, that I couldn't imagine, how am I going to get anywhere? So I think I would have told my younger self, be kind to yourself, forgive yourself. And when you fall, rise so high that you never look back to all the things that hurt you. I picked myself up. I have fell so many times. And I think I would love if someone had told me that. And I want to tell younger people in this room, and also older people, I think anyone, do not allow anything else to destroy you, because your destiny is always to shine.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful way to end our conversation today. I'm handing over to Rupanjana now.
Questions.
Oh, questions. Okay. So handing the mic over to Rupanjana to take questions from our lovely audience. So if you, as Rupanjana says, make the questions as relevant as possible and as brief as possible, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Sana Kardar and I create awareness on women's health. My question is that every one of you have spoken about the middle-aged men in suits intimidating, and how would you explain or talk about workplace gaslighting? Because I have a condition myself, and there were times when I couldn't cope up with certain things or had hospital appointments, and there would be people at work, men and women, who would tell me, oh, it's that time of the month. How do you deal with that, especially for younger women? Because obviously it would affect your mental health, and then you might just want to give up. So how would you say?
Thank you for that question. Who's going to take that question?
You
How
should
to
answer
deal
that.
with gaslighting?
You should answer that, because this is what you...
So, how to deal with gaslighting? So I think, thinking about what we've just had, absolutely I would say advocate for yourself. You have to advocate for yourself. Find your tribe. Lean into the communities that validate your reality. Okay? Think about what the truth is and what sits uncomfortable for you. Is there a microaggression at play? Are there microaggressions at play? Maybe it's an unconscious thing that the company doesn't know about, people don't know about. Speak to HR, speak to someone that you can trust. Think about what it is you do want. So rather than dwelling on what happened and the impact it had on you, of course those are important things. What do you want to happen? This is what happened to me. This is my experience. This is how it made me feel. Going forward, have expectations of your organisation. I would like to see X, Y, Z. This is the support that I need. How can you help me with these expectations that I have? Because fundamentally, as an employee, it's a bad idea giving me the mic to answer this. You have rights. And I hear about so many millennia now saying, actually, I don't want to work for you because you're not a diverse board, or you're not taking account of neurodiversity, for example. So don't forget that you have a choice, and don't forget that voices are being heard now. So absolutely advocate for yourself. I think gaslighting is one of those things where you can really doubt your reality. So take some time to reflect, journal, capture things in a notepad, speak to someone you trust, and think about, if you don't want this to happen, what do you want to happen instead? And yes, and you don't have to sit there. You can move. I say, I've got 3 girls, I say, you can move your body. If you don't like what's happening around you, get up and walk somewhere else. Hope that helps. You can talk to me afterwards if you need more. Okay, who's next?
Hi, my name is Namrata. I actually do a lot of things, different things. I'm equality, diversity and inclusion lead in Camden Council, and I also work as tourism journalist, and I'm also the secretary of Indian Journalists Association, so different roles. So, we just shot a video on Women's Day, talking about what would you have written for as a younger person when you were to your younger self. And I also said to be fearless. But my question is that, Indra Nooyi said that women cannot have it all. She's one of the most famous CEOs and she said it. So I just want to know your perspective on that. Can we have it all?
Asma, can we have it all?
The answer is no. I think that, it is a path to unhappiness. If you actually want to have everything, I think that all of us are very privileged, and I think that if you have enough, you need to share, help others, whatever. And as someone who very rarely eats a meal with my children because of my restaurant, I know that I'm balancing my work and life, and trying to do it, and I'm probably not succeeding in both. But I have forgiven myself. Women cannot have it all, nor can men have it all. They just think they're having it all. That's the difference. That's the only difference.
I came in a little bit late, so you may have already covered this. First of all, I'm really pleased that we talk about gender equity rather than equality. I think that's really brilliant. I wasn't sure whether I was allowed to come here, first of all, because often I said to my wife, is it okay if I come? She said, absolutely. So one of the key things, I wanted to ask the panel two things. In terms of what part do men play, because men are part of the problem in terms of gender equity. How do you get men involved in these conversations? And how can women help themselves also in terms of that gender equity? Because sometimes I see women can be each other's worst enemy as well. I just want to get your thoughts and comments on those two things. Thank you.
I can start. So I think one of the things that you said men are part of the problem. Men are a huge part of the solution as well, and I think that Rupanjana, when talking about C.B. Patel, gave a great example of it, is when you have men in the position to be able to elevate women. That's what we need, and that's the state that we're still in. Okay, is that at the most senior levels, there are still mostly men. Everyone's human. They have their inherent bias. Their bias is towards someone who looks and talks and acts like them. And so we need those allies at those senior levels to be actively pulling women into those ranks so that we can all just be biased humans, But there's enough diversity up there that it kind of evens itself out. I grew up in the States, there's a lot of conversation around affirmative action. I totally believe that we need to actively be relying on our male allies to help us equalize that. And one of the questions was around, how have you felt as a woman growing up in technical fields? And the honest answer is, it wasn't until more recently that I ever felt this bias. Obviously I recognized I was the only woman in the room, but I never felt like I couldn't get to the next phase. It's when you hear those top levels in an organization that you realize that the boys club is in play. And I felt it most recently, where you see that the people that are allied with the male leadership are the ones that are getting those really big roles, or the ones that are being retained. And so we need men to be part of the solution. And in what you can do about it in the workplaces, we need to actively be saying it to them, helping them acknowledge their role and saying that we need you to support us in this. I want you to be my mentor. And part of why I want you to be my mentor, part of why I want you to be my ally, is because this needs to happen. Because you'll be surprised at how many men, they know it, but they don't really know it, and they just need you to kind of give them the cue as, this is what I need you to do, this is what I need you to help me with, I need you to let me present in this meeting, I need you to take me to this meeting with you, those kind of things. I'll let somebody else answer on this.
Just to build on that, I think the foundation to that, the premise is psychological safety. So it's about cultivating an environment where someone feels comfortable enough to say, hey, why wasn't I represented at that meeting? Why couldn't I go to that leadership team? I have clients having these conversations right now, and it's so wonderful. And how do you create psychological safety? You let your team members know, you let your staff know that you're open to have a dialogue and that you're there to listen to feedback. And they may not give it to you initially, but if you reiterate that message, you send a message to say, I've got no ego, talk to me, I care about you, I see you, I hear you, you're valid, and before you know it, you'll be getting those messages from people that want those opportunities. So I think psychological safety is a must.
Maybe I'll just add one thing on that. I think there's something about if you're getting to 20 plus when you start working and then you're having to find your allies, it's important, of course, we've all said that. And that's when men in the workplace need to take that role, as we're all saying. But I think there is something, it's in your formative years that men need to take the biggest role, because that's where your dads and your granddads and that's where potentially there's something here around cultural changes. You've got to have the role models at home if you are to really be able to achieve your potential, which was one of your earlier questions. And I think to your question, it is about, am I that father who makes my children feel like children, not like son and daughter? And I think it's a bit of that. So I think that solution becomes more important, and the role of a man is the most important way earlier in the journey than before you get to that workplace.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. Yeah.
So I thought I'd add in something, because this is one of the issues we've really dealt with in economics, with women being so few. And one of the things that the Royal Economic Society did to be able to try and attract more women was to make a video about, there is a role for women in economics, and we do really interesting stuff, whether you want to talk about gender wage gaps or you want to talk about what I used to work on, Brexit, you can do what you want. And what was actually really brilliant about it was, it wasn't a brown, 40-something woman like me talking. It was actually a white man with a regional accent, middle-aged. That was so powerful, because it's not just about the support that you can give us, but also being an advocate yourself would really help sort of bring the cause forward in circles that we aren't necessarily looking for support. So I'll stop there.
Another question.
Hello, my name is Shreya. I think somewhat my question has already been answered, but I still want to put it across. I think many of us would agree with me that a fair percentage of women are not working, or they may or may not have a career and they are on a break. I wanted to ask you guys, how do we bring that equality or equity where the woman is not in a position to work, maybe by choice or maybe by the situation and the background that she's coming from. And I strongly believe that these things somewhat start from home or from the base. And if we are not earning the money, how do we still feel equal? I mean, we started with this conversation of feeling, like how do we feel generally? So when we wake up in the morning, do we feel that we are equal or we are important, even though we are not bringing in the money? And I don't know, how everybody else feels, but for me, like I've had a career on and off, and it was a choice. Sometimes, because of kids or because of, for any other reason, I might choose to not have a career, but then can I still feel important? And if I don't, how do I cope with that? How do I deal with that at home? Not necessarily I'm talking about a partner, but in general as a society. How do I bring that change or thought process in other people or within myself and start feeling empowered, even though I don't have a career?
I want to just answer this. I want to answer one part of your question, which is that when you just look at what happens to women who are not working, from Afghanistan to Sri Lanka, in every home it is a woman cooking, or the matriarch in charge of the food. In every restaurant, from the east or the west, it is men cooking. The whole point is, because we make it look effortless, because we make it look like service, no one will pay us for our roti. So our food is welcome if it's free. And this is a trap that a lot of women are in, where they think this is part of their service, this is part of what I do. I know there are people here who know a lot more about psychologically how it affects you. But I really think that we need to bring down, not just break the glass ceiling, bring the entire edifice down, flatten the ground so that women can come in and step in. You do not need to be center stage, super powerful, completely committed. But if it makes you feel good, we have loads of part-time females working for us. I think businesses should do this for women. Let them come in and work part-time. It gives you a sense of achievement. It gives you a sense of this thing that I have done something for myself. The complication is that they expect women to come in and give their lives, to dedicate everything. And not all of us can. Not all of us can. And this is a structural problem with society in the East and the West. You need to be doing it, 9 to 5 and, full time. Or you stay on the fringes and you're not part of it. This is a fault in the system and this needs to change.
Hi, Lucy White. I'm the UK economics reporter at Bloomberg. I wanted to ask a question, I guess mainly directed at Swati, and I know there's not too much you can say about monetary policy or anything, but at the moment I think on the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, the main diversity of thought seems to be among the women on the committee. It's a 6-3 split on the votes. Do you think that there's something about the gender divide that is providing more diversity of thought, and what are your thoughts on creating more diversity at the bank and on the Monetary Policy Committee? As you spoke about earlier, it's important that women are represented in making policy.
So it's hard to generalize from, say, 2 or 3 votes that might look different. So I'm not going to take that as the example. I'm instead going to make the question a bit broader, which is to say that the first thing to remember is that our lived experiences are very different. So we naturally evaluate various trade-offs that have to be made in any kind of policy setting very differently from the way men might do it. The second reason for it is not just our lived experience, but also the fact that, when big economic shocks hit, let me give you one example. In India, if inflation was really high and there was a really big crisis that the household budget just couldn't be met, who's the first person who's going to suffer for it? It's probably going to be the girl child who gets pulled out of school. That's unfortunately the way the world is, and those things matter in terms of shaping our view of what the impacts would be, and therefore also in evaluating what the policies should be to be able to get to the level where we can be happy that we're creating a fairer and prosperous society. So my general view on it is, if you systematically don't have 50%, 51% I've been reminded is the statistic, if we have 51% of the society underrepresented in key roles, naturally we're not going to make the best policy. In any policy setting arena, we always try to involve key stakeholders precisely because we think that that's what's going to lead us to the best policy possible. So why should one particular type of policy be any different? It's unfortunate that, for various reasons you might say there isn't a pool of women to pick from, this is very hard to do very quickly, that we haven't had that sort of situation where, ideally, why not 50% representation? It doesn't exist because it hasn't happened till now, but that doesn't mean that we've been making the best policies. We've clearly been missing out on that kind of expertise. So I hope that carries on.
The last 2 questions.
Thank you, good evening. I'm Devushri Roy. I work with disadvantaged young people in India. My question is, when I grew up in India, we came from a culture where a lot of women, was mentioned before, did not really help other younger women go further in the path. You have stereotypes, you continue to bring that in your life with younger females. As we reach mid-career level, I think it's kind of a responsibility as well to ease the path of those who are, entering the race or, having to maybe face similar challenges as we do. Asma's mentioned some wonderful notes on mentorship or opening the doors and how do you do that. But for me, I would really be curious to hear practical tips or examples of how do we support other women, they could be younger or older, in kind of, I don't know, removing barriers or something that we've faced, and now it's easier for us to open that door for the next woman who's behind that door. If there are any examples or practical tips.
I can talk about what I do. I mentioned people's like inherent bias earlier, so I've chosen to lean into that. So whatever capacity that I have for mentorship only goes to women and minority women. Any advisory positions that I take, like advisory for like startups and stuff, is only to female founders, and any angel investments that I make are only to female founded businesses. So that's like my practical ways of channeling whatever additional energy, capacity, financial resources that I have specifically to the demographic that I want to elevate and I think needs it.
Thank you. Anyone else? I could add one thing. At the Indian Students and Alumni Union, one of the things we do and that we're very proud of is the events we organize. And we see it as our responsibility to champion contemporary India in the UK, because there's a lot of lack of understanding of what India is all about. And so in a lot of those conversations, and there are so many topics that you can talk about all the time, the one thing we have done consistently over the last few years is to take two occasions. One is the IWD, another is the, later on in the year, there is the Elimination of Violence Against Women Day that's celebrated annually as well. We always champion women from India in this particular case and hold events twice a year for sure. And we take a legal and policy view of things when we have those conversations. So we'll bring top lawyers, we'll bring top judges from the Supreme Court of India or other high courts, or women in positions of power, to share their experiences with young women who are now beginning to enter the workforce or are studying, because they may not get those experiences, they may not hear about those experiences otherwise. So actually we find that it does two things. One, it helps us further our agenda of the understanding of contemporary India. The other is it helps young women listen to such a range of spectacularly successful older women and take hints and tips and understand what the law actually says, because often the understanding of the law and your own rights is very limited. So I think there is, in everything you do, you can choose to only advise female-founded companies, you can choose to advocate particular kind of events in everything you do. And I think there's an example here of Rupanjana actually. 10 years ago, when international students were really struggling and we had zero idea how to go about it, I would go to Rupanjana and say, this is the issue, and she would publish it. She would just publish it and guide us and say, this thing, put it in this way, frame it in this way, ask for it in this way. And so when we knew nothing, and I was hardly 19, 20 then, she was that mentor. And so that's an example where you can use your agency and your power and your platform to help make such a big difference. And so here's a shout out to Rupanjana.
Good evening, my name is Corby Pasricha. I'm the Community Engagement and Hate Crime Manager for Kent Police. Real pleasure and privilege, thank you for inviting me today. I want to focus, I've done 25 years in Kent Police. It can be a lonely journey when you are Asian, female, hidden disability, and you're sitting in a room listening to, and you say midday white males. That's quite common in policing. So I'm going to focus on upstander. We all need to be upstanders, be able to challenge and not normalise some of that behaviour we see that is unacceptable. Question to the panel is, what's your most prominent recollection of being an upstander? Because I think that will inspire us as well. Thank you.
Beautiful question.
We're all looking at you.
I'm going to be very brief because I hope others are going to speak up as well. I think that it has to be, when I was approached by Netflix to the first British chef that they featured, where they were featuring 35 of the best chefs around the world. It was very nuanced. Not only was I a female, I was an immigrant, I was a Muslim, I was a female. And I remember when my film was shown in the Berlin Film Festival, it premiered there, which is very unusual for a food film. I was terrified that no one would understand. And when the lights went on and everybody stood and clapped for 10 minutes, I felt this was an applaud for the generations of women who are in their graves, who were great cooks and were never applauded. I took that applause for my nani and my dadi and all those people who just served. You never left your grandmother's house, feeling hungry. They filled our hearts, they filled our souls. So for me, that is still my greatest moment, where I felt the salam was given for those generations back in my homeland. All of them, never celebrated, never paid, never acknowledged, behind walls, effortlessly feeding us. So that is my moment.
Anything else?
Actually, I should just mention this for those of you who aren't as inspiring as Asma is and don't have that sort of, complete put togetherness that I see Nina and Sanam have. I was that bumbling fool who knew nothing, who had no mentors, no nothing. I still somehow managed to get through. And at the end of the day, it's the quality of the work that matters. And finally, I'm going to reiterate this, that I think women typically will choose to work on subjects which matter for everybody else as well. And I think that's one thing that's helped, that no matter what I've worked on, they have always been, in my view, the right thing to do, because they were always going to help somebody who was worse off than me, who was going to be, more pressed than I ever was. And I feel like that was the only thing that mattered, and at the end of the day, that was what was always recognized. So I know that's not sounding like the best, most glamorous thing to say. I'm just not that, so sorry. It's going to be a very straightforward episode.
Could I now request ABPL Chairman C.B. Patel to come up on the stage or over here around the lectern and give the vote of thanks, please.
Where do I start? I must have overwhelmed, a bit nervous also. Usually when after 100 minutes or so, a man can come and speak here. It's a big honor for the whole man. I must say something. Air Commander Joe Lincoln, Amir Khan, all the team of RAF, Army, and so many others. We feel very grateful that we live in Great Britain. And I'll come to that in a minute. But because the armed services, the security services, the essential services look after us so well that we sleep in peace. So thank you very much. Keep around, because there are so many people. And I'm very, normally I don't get much nervous, but I'm a bit nervous also, I must say. Because these 5 people, Mamta I knew for many years, and so Sanam also, others also. But Asma, A for answer. All the answers came to you. And I must say that you were very sincere from your heart. Thank you very much for it. Not that you are from the heart. I tell you, we did not set out to have women in the most powerful roles in Nation Voice of Gujarat Samaja. She was right. It was started by Kusum Shah. She moved on. She passed away very early. We started with men, I must say. The first editor of New Life was an Englishman, Jade Adams, a very big author now. Not that he was not fit for the job, but he moved for better things. We had a Sri Lankan gentleman as editor of New Life and the Nation Voice. We had a Pakistani for 5 years, he was editor of Asian Voice and New Life. When he came to Rupanjana, I had to face serious problems. She was very efficient. She was daughter to all of our family members, but she was also very honest and understanding. I won't say she was that good to her husband and family life, but genuinely she has been. Nina is very important. When we agree, disagree, and there are people here like Cecil. Cecil, you know how to handle or how to work with Rupanjana. She will not take anybody anywhere but on equal terms. So Rupanjana, you have made us so much impression. Today Asian Voice is your voice. Very popular event. Can you come in the forward, please? This is interesting to know that how people can. Somebody talked about journey. I think you mentioned about journey once or twice. Kokila, you want to sit down or you can stand up? Kokila Patel comes from the same place where Nina comes also, Anand. Kokila Ben joined us with 2 small children 40 years ago this week. Now she's grandmother and still she's managing editor of Gujarat Samachar. She has argued with us. Can I say quarreled with us also? But genuinely, this is where we not only tolerate, we invite. We invite challenges, and that's why Asian Voice and Gujarat Samachar are a place which is wonderful women and many more. There are some others here. What I wanted to emphasize was, first of all, we live in a wonderful democracy called Britain. It's also meritocracy. Think for a moment that in a country where almost 92% people are white, Anglo-Saxon or Catholics, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the people who decide our future in terms of interest rates, wonderful country. And you people, and Mamta I know for many years, genuinely I'm very moved, Air Commander, that today, with your support of RF support, we have amazing dialogue. And 2-3 words I want to say from my point of view. Nothing worthwhile is ever given. Rupanjana or Kokila Ben or you, all of you, you had to earn your respect. It's an ongoing battle. The battle is still not over. But I genuinely believe now, you yourself know when you joined Air Force some 5 years ago. Did you imagine that you'd be Air Commander?
Never.
It was credit to others, some men also, but to your own capacity, perseverance and patience also. So this is where there are many youngsters here. This girl, if I may say, you are from Armed Forces?
No, I'm not.
You are from Air Force?
No, I'm a biomedical.
Never mind, better join. But I was very touched with the variety of questions. But you have to earn, and of all the people here, Swati, you work with people where it's ongoing battle. Economics is the most controversial subject. And I genuinely know about you, I've read about you, and one small suggestion to Rupanjana, we should have agony and culmination voice. Who will handle, because there are many questions. I tried to remember and I didn't remember, my hearing aid was working today. The questions raised, Air Commander, are very touching. Not only about career-wise, not about equality-wise, but genuine questions. And these 5 aunts or mothers gave you wonderful answers. Rupanjana said, I've got only 2 minutes to speak. And Rupanjana should also know that old man does not follow all the instructions. I must say that today is a whole celebration. It is not an event. Celebration of ongoing dialogue for a better future for everybody, men, women, and the world together. It was fantastic. Thanks very much to RF support. Thanks very much to the people. This is the Tata Enterprise, a benchmark of quality from India. So the management, especially Mahanavaz and Avari and Shalini Grover and your team, thank you very much for making our stay. And of course, I assume you're going to give us something good for stomach also. But Rupanjana and Cecil, Rupanjana, by the way, this must be this doesn't happen by chance. To assemble the people, to set the agenda, and this girl, very nice, very diplomatic, and Cecil will agree that Rupanjana will always her way. Kept her way because she thought things carefully. So my last word is all the esteemed guests. I see so many women, more girls than men, and good for you. The questions and answers and these 5 panelists, I'm so grateful to you girls. You may not realize you have given them motivation and some advice also. So I would say, Madam Rupanjana, have I finished my job?
No, you have to stay on. Thank you, CB. CB, please stay on. CB.